and I have already covered almost pretty much everything in terms of the basics of HTML programming, and we finished with the cascading style sheets, and I talked about how we can use them, what are the different kinds of CSS style sheets that we could use, and what are the benefits and also disadvantages of using these style sheets. And then I showed you a little bit in the Visual Web Developer how to use these style sheets, how to create them, how to manage them, how to apply them, and how to move them around from embedded to internal to external and inline. So to continue with this with the work, essentially we are working with the .NET framework. We are programming in ASP.NET web pages, and we would like to know how this framework works essentially, and this will be the topic of the last part of this lecture, and also I'll continue on it next week. I would like to cover about the ASP server controls, talk about what they are, what are the different kinds of server controls that are there, and how we can use them, and what would be the basic behavior that is shared among the server controls, and how we could apply and implement them in our ASP programs. Basically, the ASP server controls are the workhorse or the engine of the ASP.NET. Any page that you create, it will contain one way or another, one form or another form of server controls, and they are basically very, very diverse. They can range from very simple controls like a label that you put on your page, or more complicated controls like data controls, grid views, tree views, calendars, and things like that. And we will learn about how to use them and how to basically take advantage of their functionalities in our pages. The architecture of ASP.NET server controls is basically integrated into the ASP.NET, and this would make them very, very advantageous in terms of using and building complicated and massive websites. And essentially, throughout this semester, I hope that everybody has developed and installed the web developer on their machines. It's very simple. If you haven't installed it, please let me know, and I'll try to walk you through the installation process. And we will use the Visual Web Developer to manipulate and to work with the server controls. And essentially will work in both design view and markup view of your ASP, of your Visual Web Developer workstation. If you have noticed, I prefer working with the markup view, or essentially your HTML codes, because it's much easier to manipulate and work with as far as I'm concerned, in terms of having full flexibility and access to my web pages. If you're more comfortable working with the design view, you could do that in the design view pretty much the entire web projects that you will do. But I find it a little bit more difficult in terms of really accessing the pages. And any formatting and anything that you will do in the design view, keep in mind that the Visual Web Developer essentially applies cascading style sheets, inline cascading style sheets, as your formatting. So if you want to keep your pages more organized and also less cluttered with styles, as I showed you in the previous video, you could basically manage them and move them around, and you can take all your inline style sheets and move them back into your external style files. Okay, in order to use the server controls in the ASP.NET framework, we'd have to understand that these server controls are very much different than the way usually we would define controls in classic ASP or PHP languages, and that is this difference is very important, and it makes, although in simple websites and probably the sites that we will do and will study in our class, it might not make much of a difference in terms of the coding, but when the codes get more complicated and bigger, you will definitely notice the difference, and also the reason that we are moving towards the ASP.NET, because it makes it much easier to program. Anyway, if you know ASP, the classical ASP or languages like HTML, like PHP, you probably would know that when you are trying to create server-side codes, basically what you will do is that you mix your HTML code with your server-side codes. And essentially, for example, if you wanted to create a text box on your web page and show the time basically on this text box on the web page, let's say that you have a small text-based clock, you would put a HTML control like the input control here, and you would assign the text type to it, and for its value you take the value by assigning in basically a code, and the code here is a JavaScript code that starts with the percent and equal sign, and then basically the tag that starts with the bracket and percent and ends with the bracket and percent and bracket is telling your browser that this is a code, a server-side code, and you would like to run that code, and then create the value and the information from that code, and then apply it to your or add it to the HTML. Now the problem you'll notice here is that the server-side code and HTML are mixed, and it makes it much more difficult to essentially manage and maintain your websites. So when your pages get complex and you have more complex codes in your page, everything gets kind of messy. In the .NET framework, the ASP.NET controls work differently. They essentially live on the server in your ASPX files or web pages. And this makes it a lot more easier basically to separate the code and the HTML. And as I'll show you in a little while, when you're creating your web page or website, you could assign a code behind file for each ASPX file, and then put your codes within that file, and use your ASPX file to create the lock of your page, and then use the code to run against to program against the server controls. Now, how do these server controls essentially work? As I said, they live on the server, and when you're sending a request to the browser for a web page, for an ASPX web page, and these server-side controls are processed by your ASP.NET Runtime engine. This is the engine that's responsible for receiving and processing the requests for ASPX pages, and I showed you in the previous examples, when you run it, when you run your websites that you created, it would create a local host on your server, on your machine, and serves the pages through that server. That is your ASP.NET framework or runtime. Then what happened is that when this engine receives this request, it lets the server-side controls or server controls process this the information on the server and emit client-side HTML codes, and then the engine would put this HTML codes that are created by the server controls, puts them in the final HTML page, and then sends the or serves the eventual HTML or the final HTML code, which contains the HTML codes and tags that you created, and the HTML codes and tags that are created by the server controls on the server because they were programmed in the code behind file, and then they will be eventually served and put on the browser. So here's how to use these server controls. So if you want to create that exact same example that I showed you with a classical language, the classic HTML ASP, that you created an HTML control and then you added code to it. In the server controls, what you will do is that you essentially, instead of defining your HTML, you define your ASP.NET server controls in the page. And the classic server controls that come with your ASP.NET 4 always use the ASP colon prefix, and this prefix tells the browser that, or the engine, that this what follows is a server control. It has an ID and it has to run on the server. These controls have two attributes, as you see here. So the ID attribute is a unique name that you have to assign to and uniquely create to identify a control on your page. And then when you are in your program, you can program against this ID. So for example, if you have a text box and you want to put stuff in it, you want to put a text in your text box, you assign a meaningful ID to this server control, and then in your program you assign whatever text you need to assign to it by calling that particular ID. So notice that this ID has to be unique. If you have multiple server controls with the same ID, your Visual Web Developer will basically give you an error in the error list window. The second attribute that the server controls have is the run at attribute. It is a mandatory attribute, and your engine uses it to see that this control must run on the server, must live on the server. If you don't put this run at attribute in your server controls, your engine will not be able to run them on the server. Therefore, they will just they're either going to be not rendered and processed on the browser, or the browser would just serve them or render them as text. And so if you notice that some of your controls are missing, essentially the problem might have been that you didn't specify the run at process. You can also, for non-server elements, like for example if you have a plain HTML element, say a hyperlink, you can also use the run at attribute and ask this element to be run on the server or the client, so it's optional. Okay, here's just a simple example about how to use a simple ASP.NET server control. The example that I showed you with the classic ASP, that you wanted to show the time on a little text box on your web page, you can achieve the same exact process here by taking two steps. The first step is to define your ASP server control. So you just either type this text basically saying that this is a self-closing tag, it's an ASP tag, so ASP colon specifies that this is an ASP.NET server control. The text box is a type of control that you want to use. Basically it's just a simple text box. ID equals message, so this means that that text box name is message, and whenever you want to program against it in your code, you just type message. And this basically, if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, when you create this, each of these controls will essentially become an object, or essentially they create a class, and the instance of that class will be the object name. In this case it's message, and they then, by calling them, by typing their name and putting a period at the end of it, you will have access to all of their properties and attributes, and also functions if they do have functionalities. So in this case one of the attributes for the text box is the text within the text box. We can access it by typing message.text, and that would give you access to the text box of this object. And then run at server specifies that this thing has to be on the server. And in your code behind file, which is your C# program, or it could be a Visual Basic program, you just simply use the programming language, in this case the C# language, to put the time and date of the server into this text box. So what you would do is that you call the object that you want to assign the text to it. In this case was message, and then you want to put the text that you want to create in the text property of your object, of your message object. So you type .text. This is basically a variable, and we'll talk about this programming in variables and attributes and things later on, probably next week, when we work a little bit with server controls to just get a feel of how they work, and then we want to start programming them. I will talk about a little bit about how C# allows you to do this. Now, then you put the equal sign, and then you type in a text. So you want to say the time is whatever time the server has. So you type the time is text in quotation marks, and then plus an object, a string. And this string essentially is another object that is on the server. It's called date and time. That object essentially contains the date and time of the server. One of its attributes is now, which specifies that you're interested in the current date and time. And then another attribute that this object will have is the time of day. So you want to specify what exactly the time of day is now, instead of basically the date. And then you want to convert it to a string, so you use the toString function, and eventually this whole long thing will be the current time of the server. And then you just add it by that plus sign to the rest of the text, and then you put this text within the text box. Now what I want you to notice is that here I created the look of my ASP.x page by putting the server controls in it, but I didn't do any coding or any programming in my ASPX file. And then whatever programs I needed to have for the page was done in the code behind file, which is a separate file attached to the ASP.x file. And this makes it a lot easier to work basically from one file to the next, and basically make your documents a lot more organized, essentially like the CSS or cascading style sheets, which separated the visual design of your page from the data that you want to present in the page. And this way you could put all the design files and formatting and styling of your page in the cascading style sheet, and not worry about how you would have to format every little element of your HTML tags. This is pretty much the same idea of creating your pages, and then whatever controls you want to program, you just go ahead and program them in a separate file. And the link and the connection between the code and the ASP pages are essentially the ID that you assign to server controls to be able, or even to any other HTML element, to be able to program against them from your programming file. Just you call the ID and then you manipulate it in the program. Okay, now that we kind of sort of started talking about the ASP control files, let's now go on and start our first real ASPX file, and I'll show you how the server controls actually work by importing 3 simple server controls and working with them and writing a very simple program that would ask the name, and then the person could type in their name in the text box on the page, and then the server control runs on the server and creates the name and writes out the name that the person just typed. This is a very simple data manipulation, and I'll show you how to work in both the markup view and the design view. So here's the the empty Visual Web Developer, click on File, and then click on New Website, and you want to have a ASP.NET Empty website here, so click on the ASP.NET Empty, and then from the languages you want to make sure that you click on C#, and then down here I'll call this ASP demo, which will be the root of this file. It's the root folder, and the file has been created, and right click on the ASP demo and add new item, and from the add new item you want to click on the web form. You want to make sure that you are in Visual C#, and let's call the file, instead of default, let's call it controls demo. And make sure that you check place code in separate file. That would create a code behind file for you, and you want to make sure that you unselect the select master pages. You don't need that for now. And then press AND. Once you press AND, you see that your file has been created, your controls demo.aspx. On the top you see that there is a page directive that defines the language of your page, which is C#. You created it, and the code file that you have, and you will put your C# code in the code behind file, which is essentially controls demo.aspx.cs. So ignore the rest of these automatic codes that are created. Let's give our page a title, and in the head element the title would be controls demo. And as you see, you have a form which runs at server. Its ID is form1, and then you have the div element that is basically the main container of your web page. At the bottom of this page there are options, or basically tabs. The first tab to the left is design. If you click on it, it takes you to the design view. The split tab makes a split screen, and you will have two windows, the source code and the design code. And when you make changes and you refresh your file, or you save your files, it would synchronize this design view and the source view. And of course right now we are in the source view. And to the right of it there are several little tags that appear here, and it will tell you that where you are in the source view. Essentially what the last tag tells me that I am currently, the cursor is in the title, and which is in the head, and which is in the HTML tag. So if I knew what server controls I'm using and what their codes are, I could click between the opening and the closing div tags or div tags, and then type the server controls, and then basically program it within my source. Or I could click on the design view, and in design view you'll see that the look of, or the design look of my page is essentially I have a div element and it is empty. So I need to bring server controls down here. Okay, so where are the server controls and how I can get to them? That's a good question. Right now I have my design view in the middle, I have my Solution Explorer and the Properties windows to the right, and I have my Manage Styles to the left, which is the leftover from the CSS demo that we were working. So to bring the controls, you click on View and then go down to Other Windows, and then from Other Windows click on Toolbox, or alternatively you could click on Control, Alt and X. And here are the controls that you have, and I'll talk about them in a little while. For now I need to create a text box, or bring down a text box, a button and a label. and these are the controls that I will be using. So the label is this control that's basically its icon is an A, a capital A, and it's called label. The button is all the way on top here, and the text box, I need to scroll down there, and because these are organized alphabetically. And as you see, all of these controls that are right now I can use are essentially in the standard section of my controls. So the first element that I will bring is a text box. I drag and drop it in the div element, and it looks something like that. And then the next element is a button. Drag and drop it right next to the text box, and then drag and drop the label element all the way to the right of everything. Now I want the label element to basically be placed under the text box here. So what I can do is that I can move my cursor by pressing the left and right arrows and place the cursor on between the button or the label and the label, and then press enter. As you see in the design view, when you enter or when you type things and you format things, they will be essentially formatted accordingly in the source. And right now, if I look at my source file, I will be that there is a line return that is placed between the button, actually right after the button, and that brings the label down. So let's go to the source view, and here's how your source view now looks like. The first control that you created is placed first, and it is essentially a text box. Its name is textbox1, and it runs its server. The second control is an ASP:button. That's a button control, server control, and its ID is button1. It runs its server, and it contains a text on it which is called button. And the next label or control is an ASP label, and the enter that I pressed between the button and the label in the design view now is translated into a line break. So, and the label ID is label1, and it's called it's run in the server, and it contains a text that is essentially automatically assigned to be label. Now let's move back to the design view, and let's click on the text box. Okay, now with the text box selected, if I press F4, it would bring me to the text box's properties window, which is essentially down at the bottom here, and has several properties. Let's change its ID from textbox1. Let's change it to your name, and that would assign the ID to the text box. Now if I go back to the source page, I'll see that the ID of the text box is now changed from the text box 1 to essentially your name, and then when I'm programming against it, I use the your name as the name of this object. Let's go back to the design view. Let's click on the button. Let's change the text of the button to submit information, and its ID to submit button. The ID is all the way at the bottom, and submit button. Notice that the ID has to be one word. It can't be multiple. And as you see, it's changed in the design view. And for the label, let's click on it and let's eliminate the text for the label. So this way, my page, my label doesn't have a text in it. So when it's rendered in the browser, it's empty. Okay, now let's run this page in the browser, and here's how the page looks like. Essentially, there's a text box. I can type in information in, and then I can click on submit information, and there's a label whose text is now empty and it doesn't show anything. Now, so if right now I haven't had any information basically implemented within this or any code implemented within this page, and it doesn't show me anything useful or doesn't perform any server operations. Let's check the source of the page. If I click on the source of the page, as you see, it's an HTML document actually, and it has a title, and the title is controls demo that I created, and then it has a form, and the form essentially uses a post method to post back information, and I'll talk about this later on when we're talking about ASP programming. And it's the form that it posts back information to is essentially to itself, which is the controls demo .aspx, and it has hidden states and hidden values, and I'll talk about that, essentially telling you how the ASP.NET engine preserves states for its controls so that you wouldn't lose information. And finally, the information is basically rendered as HTML elements or HTML controls. I have one input element with name, your name, that's its ID, and or actually it's a text type, text box, and then I have another element that is a submit type. It basically is a button, HTML button, with the ID of submit button, and then I have a line break, and then I have a span element with the ID of label 1, and it is currently empty. So keep in mind what you saw here, and let's minimize this page, and let's go back to our file and program it so that when I type my name in the text box and press submit information, it would put the name I typed in into the label and shows the name on the browser. So in order to do that, let me go back to the design and let's double click on the submit information. Once you do this, automatically the controls demo.aspx.c# file opens that contains, and this is this file from the Solution Explorer, and this contains information about the C# program. And as you see, it is essentially a class. It's called controls demo, and it has two functions in it, and there's a function page load that will be run when the page is loaded, and if you need to perform any sort of processes and then show them on your page, you put those processes within page load. And then because I double clicked on the button, it created another protected function here, and that function is called submit button _ click, which is essentially an event associated to the button, and this particular event is when I click on the button in the browser. The idea here is to take the text from the text box once I click on the page, on the button in the page, and copy this text in the label.txt. So as I said, I need to use the ID of the label because I'm programming against it, and the ID of the label is label 1, and the IntelliSense automatically sensed it and gave me the option. So I want to put some text value within the text box of label 1. So I type in label 1 and I press period, and it gives me access to all the properties and the functions within, or methods within, this label 1 object. And the property that I'm interested in is its text information, and I can either scroll down all the way to find the text, or I can simply type in text and it automatically creates that for me. And I want to assign to this text a string called uTyped : and uTyped the things that you type in the text box. So I want to now program against the text box that I created, and its ID was your name. So I type your name, and again it automatically recognizes the your name object that was a text box, and as you see, the objects that it recognizes, it gives them a little icon which is like a blue cube, and it is a protected object. It's actually a private object, so it has a little key on it. And so your name dot text, which is the information that you type in the text box, and semicolon. So this is all the programming I have to do here, and I save everything, and then let's go to the ASP.x, and then let's run the page in the browser. And now the page in the browser contains the same information. As you see, the text box is empty because I emptied its text information, and then I type in my name. So click on the text box. When your cursor is in the text box, type in your name, and then click submit button. And when you submit button, you see that the information will be sent to the server, and you saw that the page was, while the page was being refreshed, the information was posted back to the server, and the server processed this information by running the program I created in the click event of the submit information button, and created this text plus the name that I typed in as the text value of this text box, and put them together and put them in the label, and now the label is showing this information on the browser. Now if I go and view the source page here, you would see something really interesting. So if you look at all these view states and hidden information, they still retain some hidden information about the state of the page, and we will talk about that later. But what is really now important is to look at this label. And the label previously, when I showed you, was empty, and now it contains text. And this text is basically just the text that I typed in as the value of this input element of or the HTML element. So so notice what happened is that now with the page that is rendered on the browser, I don't have any server controls or any server processes. All I have are HTML elements and HTML controls, and the ASP.NET runtime used the server controls, which were the text box, the button, and the label, processed the program that I created, and basically created this set of HTML codes. They emitted these codes, and this code is now, as a final look of my program, my web document is basically rendered on the browser. So basically that's about it in terms of an introductory opening to ASP server controls, and you could just go on and work a little bit with the server controls and see how they work for you, and we will I'll finish it here, and we'll pick up on the different types of ASP server controls and a closer look at them for the next week, and I'll finish up the introduction and some details about using more complex server controls, and then we will start studying about the programming part of it.